Hello, I'm Nicholas Thompson. I'm the CEO of The Atlantic, and it is my great pleasure to be here today with Chris Cox. He is the Chief Product Officer of Facebook. Hello, Chris. How are you?
How you doing, Nick? Hi, everyone.
I'm doing great today. So I have a
Good to be
very
back here.
hard question for you.
Okay.
Let's start with a tough one. What exactly is a Chief Product Officer at a place as giant as Facebook? What is the product that you are chief of?
So I'm responsible for our family of apps. That's Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Messenger. I also spend a bunch of time on the company's strategy, the company priorities, and making sure that everything fits together as a whole.
Okay, that sounds relatively smooth. That's Chris's job right there. What's interesting about your job is that you basically did that job for a long time, from the beginning of Facebook, more or less the beginning of Facebook, to 2019. Then you took about 14 months off and came back in June of 2020, a couple months into the pandemic. It took a year where I saw you on various panels. You talked about environmental issues, political issues. Tell me something that you learned in that year that has informed the way you work at Facebook now versus the way you worked at Facebook before your time off.
I mean, one of the things that was so interesting for me to see personally was how many interesting startups there were here in the Bay Area focused on climate. One of the things I hadn't had a chance to explore as an individual or as an entrepreneur is what was going on in climate in 2019. There were lots more young people paying attention to it. There were lots more software people paying attention to it. Folks working on batteries, folks working on advanced nuclear. There had just been a lot more attention shifted to the climate problem. I had a chance to work with a couple startups on the ground, rolling up my sleeves. One is Planet, focusing on satellite imagery and ways of using satellite imagery to help provide better data to policymakers, journalists, and environmentalists looking at problems like methane emissions. Another one's a company called Watershed, working on helping companies build, measure, and report on their climate programs, which is something that's been a trend, especially starting with a lot of tech companies and some more forward-thinking companies in other industries. So I would say the main thing was having a chance, aside from having a bunch of time to just be with my kids and my family and my wife and just clear out my sort of inbox for a while and just be with them, which was the most important thing, was help me just get centered and grounded, was getting to know a lot about what was going on in climate and the climate community. And, since returning to the company, one of the things I've helped us do is fleshed out our climate plans, the Climate Science Information Center, which is a tool that we've launched in almost every country, many countries in the world now, to help people understand what's going on in climate. I had learned that one of the ways that we could help the most was just helping folks get better information about climate that was region specific. So that was one specific thing that I took back with me.
All right. Well, it seems like the climate change problem was a little too easy and calm, so you went back to Facebook to get an even broader suite of complex issues to deal with. So one of the things I want to dig into with you is that I've listened to a lot of Facebook executives and read a lot about Facebook, and it seems that there's a real sense at Facebook that the world is shifting ever more in a direction that empowers creators, individuals. Right? Power shifting from the center of orgs to the nodes, from established organizations to individuals. The fact that Facebook believes this will surely make it more true, because Facebook will help accelerate that trend. Tell me how Facebook thinks about this trend and whether you think it's a permanent one or just for the next few years.
Well, the idea of creator, I mean, the way we define creator internally is these are people for whom the internet is their medium and their personality is their brand. And they are generally speaking to some sort of niche where they are representing a message or a story and a community that is oftentimes historically underserved. If you look at Amanda Gorman, she's an incredibly sort of poignant current example of that. You see this in journalism with folks like Ben Thompson, who's sort of one of the original sort of tech independent journalists going out and building a business and his own sort of newsroom and opinion and voice. But you see this in lots of other verticals. You see it in music and dance. Umi Janta is one of my favorite creators on Instagram. She's a Senegalese woman who lives in Berlin, and she's a roller skater who dances to disco, but she's just phenomenal. And she was this kind of voice that spoke to people during COVID about going outside on your own, but still sort of showing that you were free and you could still dance and move around and sort of find your own joy even if you couldn't be with your friends. Across essentially every vertical, game streaming, music, dance, sports, journalism, group admins is a huge area where we see this on Facebook. We see that creators are just incredibly important parts of our platforms and of the internet more broadly. I think if you go back to David Bowie's musings about the internet in the mid 90s on MTV, he basically gets it right, as he does a lot of other things in that interview, that what part of what the internet's magic was going to be was unlocking the ability for people to tell stories that weren't otherwise being told, and then for a sense of belonging and community to come and happen around that. We think that's important. We think that's what people want. We think it's relevant and meaningful for society and where the world's going. And it's one of our big priorities across all of our work at the company this year.
Well, so that David Bowie quote, a very famous quote, right? And it's, what the internet, or part of that interview, one of the quotes that came through it is, what the internet is going to do for society, both good and bad, is unimaginable, right? Which, pretty much correct, I think. Checks out. So let's talk about the transition to creators. There's good that it creates, which is it empowers all kinds of individuals. It allows me to follow whatever niche interest I'm interested in. It allows my kids to, their ability to learn soccer, tiny, minute skills from crazy little celebrities on YouTube teaching soccer is absolutely fabulous. Some of the costs, though, are destabilizing organizations, right? You see in journalism, right? Lots of the best writers leaving big news organizations to go out on their own, which is good for them, maybe good for their readers, not great for the organizations. And you see different kinds of destabilization that will happen as this trend accelerates. How do you think about both the good side and the bad side of the new creator economy?
Well, we talked a lot about the good side. And I think importantly, you even see this in health, where we go out and talk to people all around the world. We sit down with them and ask them, tell us what you love about the platform, what you hate about the platform. Take us through Instagram, take us through Facebook, take us through WhatsApp, what's working for you, what don't you like. We aggregate that together, and that's essentially how we build our product roadmaps. For the Facebook app specifically, we started hearing a lot about 5 or 6 years ago about these large groups, which were organized around very specific issues. So, for example, on the more irreverent side, we heard from all of the people who walk their wiener dogs in London. They were called the London Lowriders. And they had sort of like all banded together in this group on Facebook, and it was a place for them to relate on something that was kind of irreverent, which is having a specific kind of dog. But it was also a place for them to feel in touch with other Londoners and other community members, etc. And if you followed, Robert Putnam's work or David Brooks's work or many of the other academics and students of communities, one of the things they say, and that I really believe, is that the fabric of these communities is really, really important for social life in general. And so I think one of the greatest goods I hope we can contribute to is just communities, real world communities coming together through the internet that otherwise wouldn't have. We've also heard this around specific kinds of health groups, people who have orphan diseases like multiple myeloma. They'll get a case of a serious disease. Their doctor will say, orphan means less than 1 million people have it. So their doctor will say, we're not sure, we don't know that much about this, we'll give you what information we can, et cetera. And then a patient or a parent of somebody who's suffering from one of these will leave and try and figure out what to do. We see in many cases, these groups are finding each other and coming together and rallying around what's the best treatments. How do you talk to your kids about it? Who are the best doctors? In some cases, petitioning drug companies to help, because they've aggregated together, find a cure. So these are some of the most fascinating and important stories we see, and it's part of the reason I'm so excited about it. When it gets to the bad, we have, spent a ton of time as a company investing in infrastructure to get really, really, really good at mitigating the downsides. Misinformation is a great example. Election integrity is a great example. We have over 35,000 people across the company working on help protect elections in particular, not just in the US and Europe, but all around the world, to make sure that we're understanding using our AI systems, using language experts, using partnerships with electoral commissions to understand viral content in a matter of minutes. We've partnered with over 80 fact checkers around the world. We're the only company that's done that to make sure that when viral misinformation, which is one of the pernicious problems, starts to happen, we're able to do something about it right away. So how we see our role as a company is understanding all the good and understanding all the bad, and really doing everything we can to get the balance right and to mitigate the downsides as we head into the future.
So there's another critique of the creator economy, or an interesting argument that is being made by economists, which is that if you look at different sectors of the American economy, perhaps a growing portion of the American economy, there's something like a barbell distribution where the very large companies are getting stronger and stronger and accumulating more power due to network effects, economies of scale. And there are lots and lots of tiny startups, right? They're individuals who are able to do things. And the companies in the middle are getting crushed, right? And you can see this in media, right? It's a great time to be an individual newsletter writer. It is a great time to work at the New York Times. It is a terrible time to work at any newspaper, any regional newspaper, or many other publications. Ideally, the Atlantic's can be on the fat side of the barbell. Tell me what you think
Absolutely.
about. Tell me that. In fact, that's my job. Tell me whether you worry about this larger economic effect as the creator economy grows and becomes more prominent.
Yeah, and I think in particular, one of the things I'm interested to see is how much of these creators are becoming businesses themselves that are hiring people and sort of becoming institutions on their own. I mean, part of what we're seeing with technology is more of the tools are disaggregated and built by individual companies. So you have, both in tech and in many other industries, you just have the fact that businesses exist to help companies not need to have everybody in one building, but can have the tool for, Salesforce management built by Salesforce. And I think there's a lot of efficiency to that. And I think that's probably a good thing for the economy overall. But what we are, I think, and I'm particularly really interested is how many of these creators become businesses themselves that can hire people. And there's plenty of examples of that. During COVID, one of the things we were very attentive to is just helping small and medium businesses manage and create digital storefronts and digital presences during COVID, and do what we could to help them have audiences that they could reach without a physical storefront. And in some cases, manage hiring, manage delivery, manage staying in touch with customers in a way that was affordable, in a way that was targeted, and in a way that helped them sort of keep their employees having jobs and keep their customer relationships intact. We've talked a lot about the business side of the company, not just for advertising, but also for making business messaging and business presence easier on WhatsApp, where there's just a huge amount of businesses who now have direct relationship with their customers. So I see our role in that equation as being making it easy for businesses of every size to have a really good presence, really good relationship with their customers, and really good tools for staying in touch.
Chris, let me ask you another question about the creator economy and the movement of power to individuals. And it ties into an issue I know you're passionate about, which is polarization. So there's a traditional critique of the internet and polarization, which says internet pushes us into filter bubbles. And there's a lot of data on both sides of this debate. But this is kind of a newer argument that I want to ask you about. And that argument is that one of the reasons you have so much polarization in America is that the parties have lost power to the individuals. And so AOC is a much more powerful voice in the Democratic Party than the DNC, right? People hear a lot more from Matt Gaetz than they do from the RNC. And the argument is that as social media continues to empower individuals at the expense of the infrastructure and the center, you will get more polarization. Do you worry about that?
Well, I think if you look at the US, I'm not certainly the world expert on polarization, and I wouldn't purport to be one, but if you look at the story of US polarization, which has waned and waxed over time, going back to the 19th century, you see that sort of the big shift started happening in the 1960s and the early 1970s. And that political polarization was a big part of it, the changing of the Republican Party and what it meant. And another big accelerant, again, according to the experts, was cable news, which was big institutional power, sort of having a voice that spoke to lots of Americans, that was influencing their decisions about what they believed. The studies around the internet's effect on polarization, as you said, are much more mixed. There was a study released just last week that looked at ideological polarization in Bosnia and found that when users chose to deactivate or stop using voluntarily, Facebook in particular, their polarization increased. And that study has been replicated in other contexts. This is Matt Genskow, it's Pablo Barbera, it's a number of the leading academics at Stanford, the London School of Economics, who study polarization. They find repeatedly the phenomena that exposure to weak ties, which is people that you trust in some way, shape, or form, people you went to college with, people you went to church with, people that aren't your close ties that you see every day, and they're not your normal media diet, the TV station you watch, tend to expose you to a more diverse set of ideas. And that tends to be depolarizing in a lot of contexts. And obviously a lot more research needs to be done, but I think this is one of the really important conclusions that needs to be investigated when we talk about the internet and social media's effect on polarization. The other thing that's interesting to point out is just that the US is a unique phenomenon. If you look at Germany or Canada, those are countries that are depolarizing ideologically and effectively, which are the two different ways it's studied, during equally high internet penetration and use of the same products and same tools. You see that across a number of countries. So we do need to, I believe, study the US as a unique phenomenon when we look at its polarization right now.
So do you think that overall Facebook is a depolarizing force? Like if Facebook just got unplugged for the next year, America would get more polarized?
It's hard to say conclusively based on the data that's out there. I certainly believe that regardless of what the data says right now, which is mixed at best, we do need to spend a lot of time understanding how we can help bring people closer together. And also how we can mitigate negative impacts like viral misinformation, like we talked about, which I believe when it comes to polarization is sort of the good, bringing people together in groups and communities, where there's a lot of research suggests that in general, that's a good depolarizing force, as well as mitigating viral misinformation, which based on our research could be a polarizing force.
That makes sense. Let's talk about viral misinformation and the strangest misinformation story of the year, I think, on Facebook and in the news media too, which is that for quite some time, from last year up until just a couple of weeks ago, you banned stories on Facebook that suggested that the coronavirus might have been made in a lab. And then you've walked backwards on that and said, actually, this is not viral misinformation. We got that wrong. Lots of media organizations made a similar mistake. What did you learn from that episode, and how will it change the way you think about the balance between free speech and filtering?
I mean, I should ask you this question, Nick, on what you think. I mean, I think this lab leak theory being basically removed from discourse. We work with the scientific community and we work with fact checkers to try and understand how we should treat misinformation and what is misinformation. We want that decision to be one where that's being made in the hands of experts, and we're implementing the opinions of those experts. Clearly here, though, we were taking this content down. And this is not just some random discussion happening somewhere. This is a very, very, very important sort of piece of information about the question of our time and what we should do about it. So look, I think it gives us reason to not jump to conclusions that when something is a consensus for a moment in time, we should take it down. For me, it leaves my point of view at like looking at virality is important, looking at things that are getting a lot of reach and scrutinizing them and making sure we understand those items in particular. But when it comes to taking ideas down and telling someone they can't say something, we need to be very, very, very cautious about taking that position. And that's my takeaway on how to frame sort of the responsibility for us.
And then my read of Facebook externally, and I'm sure there have been 1,000 meetings, and I wasn't in those meetings, is that Facebook took a very strong position leading to the Georgetown speech that Mark Zuckerberg gave, taking a very, not quite absolutist, but a very strong position in favor of free speech. And then it felt like in the year or two afterwards, Facebook backpedaled a little bit because employees argued that free speech, certain kinds of speech can be threatening, can be dangerous, can lead to an unsafe environment. In fact, when we talked on stage in Aspen a couple years ago, we started with a trade-off between free speech and safety. So it seemed to me that Facebook was moving a little bit back, pulling back from the absolutist free speech position. But does this episode with the lab leak, does anything that happened in the last year mean that Facebook is going to walk in the other direction, back towards that initial free speech position that Mark had laid out?
I think that the fundamental position is still the same, which is that the ethos of the platform and the ethos of democracies is that people should have a voice. And especially given how big our platform is, we do need to pay attention to protecting that. I mean, I think one of the most important things that's happened since we last talked, Nick, is setting up an oversight board, which is at arm's length from the company's decision-making, which is designed to be something like a Supreme Court, which is a balance of power, led by world experts and former prime ministers and sort of leading figures in the pantheon of human rights experts who study the balance of free speech in specific environments and societies and regions, for them to make some of these really difficult calls and also to publish the decision, publish sort of the deliberation and take appeals and stuff like that. So that's been one of the most important things that we've tried to set up in order to try and get this balance right. And in particular to say, look, we do realize how important these calls are, but we want them to be made in a way that is not sort of tied up in the business itself in order to devolve power, but also to put the power in the hands of folks who society can trust and society can look at and whose decisions they can understand over time.
We have a couple minutes left. Let's move to one of the most interesting things that is happening at Facebook right now, which is virtual reality. And, I've started playing with the Oculus. My kids have started playing with the Oculus. My parents-in-law have started playing with the Oculus. It's clear that we're reaching a moment where VR has a chance to be vastly more prevalent than it has been. What has Facebook learned from the trials and tribulations and the successes and failures of its other breakout products that shape the way you think about how VR will develop? Because it seems like once again, Facebook is going to be a dominant player at the platform level at a hugely important new technology.
Yeah, the VR stuff is starting to become real in a way that I think is just very exciting. This is something that was a dream for decades in technology. It's something that 7 or 8 years ago when we started talking to the Oculus team was kind of like a big box on your face that you had to plug into a computer, and it's turned into something that allows you to feel like you can sit in a room with folks and actually see their body language and have a conversation, see the hand movement, which is something we've been working a lot on. Use spatial audio so that voices in a room can actually be heard in relation to their position. This kind of stuff is years of work to get right, but once you get it right, it's quite magical and it's starting to work. And we hope it's going to be a step forward from looking at each other through a box and having a hard time tracing gaze and constantly interrupting each other, which is a lesson we've all learned sort of in this period of time of COVID. So we're very focused on the sort of fundamental good that it could bring which is the ability for folks who are apart to be together, for a family to be together, for colleagues at a workplace to feel like they can be together and have a meeting together and be closer together, for folks to attend a concert or a comedy club one day in a way that doesn't feel like I'm watching a box through a screen, but actually feels like I'm there. I mean, the potential for education is immense. You're already seeing a bunch of medical applications for psychiatrists who are trying to find ways of treating trauma by helping patients be in situations. There was a very good New York Times piece on this recently, by helping patients be in situations, but in a calm environment that were traumatic. In ophthalmology, you're starting to see uses around helping people recover the disease, which is essentially a lazy eye. So you're starting to see some applications which are fundamentally good that we're trying to understand and be excited about. And we're spending a lot of time on safety. I mean, both the safety of the consumer and making sure the device is comfortable and that there's not any issues there, but also especially as the environments become social. We hired Pavni Devanji, who's one of tech's great experts on understanding how to help younger people navigate these environments. And we're going to make sure we take the same attention we've paid to that over the past many years and take it to VR.
Because in some ways, all of the things that make VR so powerful also make it so dangerous. The possibility for mental manipulation is immense and far exceeds. There's only so much that even the best Russian hacker can manipulate me through text. Maybe they can do a little bit more through video, but they can do massively more in virtual reality. The potential for threatening or violative behavior of some sort is immense too. So you have real burdens and responsibilities as this goes forward to make sure that none of that happens.
Absolutely. And, just like if you just look at the vast majority of interactions on the platform, they're just fundamentally good. I mean, if you look at WhatsApp, the huge vast majority is conversations with friends and family. It's people who can't be together, celebrating birthdays together, not being able to get together for a meal, but instead having a moment together to play a game or to watch a video. And we believe in that fundamental good as being the good that propels our mission forward as a company. And like I said, we also believe in the great responsibility that comes with it.
Well, we're out of time, but I look forward very much, Chris, to doing this in VR with my extravagant hand gestures actually being replicable in the system. Maybe we can do that next year. You've already started doing your executive meetings in VR, right?
We've started doing some meetings in VR. Yeah, it's really, like I said, some of those features, it's really neat. It's starting to get quite good. So more to come on that soon.
All right, so Aspen 2019, live. 2020, Zoom. 2021, Zoom. 2022, VR. All right, we'll see you.
We'll see
you next year, Chris.
Thank you, Nick. And
right,
thanks,
great.
everybody.